Hello, welcome, and thank you to everyone for joining today for this Theology Thursday podcast. My name is Naomi. I am one of the project workers for SEM's Faith in Action project in collaboration with Project Bonhoeffer. Today, I'm joined by Sophie Mitchell, who is the fundraiser for SEM. And we're also, as a very special guest, we have the Revd Alan Green, who is the rector of St. John's Church in Bethnal Green in London, and also a member of Tower Hamlets Interfaith Forum, which is the reason that we're coming together today for the discussion to talk a little bit about interfaith work, interfaith engagement, and sort of what that means for us as Christians. So last week, from the 13th to the 20th of November, was National Interfaith Week. That happens in the UK every November. And the aims of the week are to strengthen good interfaith relations with at all levels, increase awareness of different and distinct faith communities in the UK, in particular, celebrating and building on the contributions which members make to their neighbourhoods and to wider society as well. And then finally, and possibly most importantly, to increase an understanding between people of different faiths and non-religious beliefs as well. So, Reverend Alan, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine, thank you. It's great to be here.
Brilliant. Thanks so much for joining us. So just to start off, it would be great if you could just give us a little introduction about who you are, a little bit about your work, and also just tell us a little bit about Tower Hamlets Interfaith Forum and the kind of work that you do.
I've been ordained since 1985. I spent my first 9 years on an outer estate on Merseyside in Kirby. 4 years break as a university chaplain, and then I've been here in Tower Hamlets in East London for 24 years. I grew up in Brighton. My parents weren't particularly religious, but I was quite a handful, so they sent me to Sunday school. And I really liked the Bible. I liked the stories. So I was quite fascinated by that, and then joined the church choir and never really left. But what I liked as I grew up, what I liked about the church for me was not certainty, was not that it provided answers, but increasingly as a teenager, that it allowed me to ask lots of questions with some confidence. So that's always been at the root of my faith, that it isn't about simple answers to things. It's not about certainty, it's about living with doubt and being able to ask difficult questions in the world in which we live. So that I found it in some ways quite difficult being a Church of England establishment priest, because that image of being part of the status quo, part of the order of things in this country, does not sit easily with my attitude towards either faith or towards life. And I hope that in my ministry I've been able to provide space for people to ask questions and to work through their own thoughts and their own issues, to either become a Christian, to become a decent atheist, to become a Buddhist or a Muslim. I want to help steer people through the difficulties of spirituality and trying to understand it and find some benefit and some confidence themselves. I never expected here in Tower Hamlets, when I took up my ministry here, to be involved in interfaith. I knew that Tower Hamlets was a very diverse borough. Indeed, we are now a Muslim majority borough. But my work on Merseyside had been very much in grassroots politics, and I expected to be doing the same here. Except grassroots politics back in the late 90s was quite frozen in Tower Hamlets. And where I had found those links in the community on Merseyside within grassroots political movements, here I found them within faith communities. And so the Interfaith Forum developed not as a philosophical discussion group, but as a response to the situation in which we found ourselves in this borough. So we came together initially to respond to hate crime, particularly hate crime against faith communities, and recognized that the issue was less about young people being full of hate for other faiths. It was about young people having nothing to do and faith as an available tool of disaffection. So our task was to turn that into how could faith be a tool for bringing the community together. And it's that we've worked at over the last 20 years here. And some of that has been really constructive work in helping people understand the faith communities, between the faith communities and secular organizations and faith communities. But part of it has been about expressing solidarity against those who come and try to disrupt our life here. So when particularly the far right have tried to show that we can't live together in the East End, we have made it very clear that we not only can, but we intend to preserve that in the face of such opposition and aggression.
Thank you so much. Just taking a little bit of a step away from interfaith for a minute. When we were preparing for this call, we found out that you were a member of SCM in the 70s. I was wondering if you could tell us what was it like being a part of SCM at that time, and how did that develop some of your themes about political and social action and justice?
I first became aware of the student Christian movement when I was still a sixth former, and read their magazine at the time, Movement. I was myself holding on to Christianity through liberation theology. That gave me a breath of fresh air, and realized that the church did not have to be the backbone of the establishment. And I found in Movement the links to that theology. And so that was why when I went to university, I was keen to join the local SCM group. It was at the time of communal living. So I had a lot to do with the SCM house and lived in it for one of my 3 years at university. We were a very diverse group. It was really, I think, the SCM and that house gave us the framework in which to be very diverse indeed. So the only thing that we didn't really like was straightforward Christianity, I think. There were members of the group who were not Christian at all. There were members who were struggling with their faith. And there were members like me who had a very clear faith but didn't want to be part of the mainstream. So we were quite challenging to the churches around, I think, at the time. And there was a very strong national movement then as well, so that some of what we were doing was local to our university and to our city, but also then were joining up with national events and training. There was a fabulous course called GOAT, Gestalt, Orientation and Alinsky Training, which brought together the Saul Alinsky social challenge with a psychological basis, which was very 70s indeed.
That sounds fascinating. Wow. It's always lovely for us when we hear about how SEM has changed throughout the years, and but also how the core values have sort of stayed the same. And I think it's very interesting what you said before about being informed by liberation theology and sort of wanting to use your faith on sort of a grassroots level as sort of and take an active role in your life in helping out the community. Which I think is very interesting to sort of pivot back to the interfaith work that you do with the Tower Hamlets Interfaith Faith Forum, because a lot of the work you've done, you've mentioned already, sort of grassroots work and sort of interacting and responding to nationalist feelings and alt-right movements within the area. So I'd love to just hear a little bit more about that, maybe some of the projects you've done as a forum and how you've worked together to sort of combat these things.
And we started with some very simple projects at one level. We set out to provide an interfaith calendar. So a large poster which brought together all the major festivals of all the faiths. And to get that in every public space we could in the borough. And that helped us get to know one another, work together, deal with all of those difficulties of which festivals are the major festivals, which strand of each faith do you go with, which is a total minefield and you always get wrong. But at the same time, it was a very simple tool to show that faiths had a lot in common, and to ensure that faith was being advertised within the public square. We had a good start here in that because of the presence of a large Muslim population, the council, which was white dominated at the time, at least with its officers, could get over their liberal concerns about dealing with faith, because they saw the presence of local Muslims as a cultural issue rather than a religious one, so that they were prepared to engage with at least with Islam in a way that they were less confident about doing with Christianity. So that it was a means of showing that it was possible to engage with faith without dealing with the problematic areas of evangelization and conversion. And so that was the beginning of helping particularly secular organizations have a way of dealing with faith within the borough. So that through simple things like that poster, we're able to build up good relations not only with one another, but with council officers, with police representatives, and with other organizations, so that gradually there was a sense of trust between us. My phone, let me turn that down, I hope. Yep. So that we could build up that trust between us, so that we could become a guide to the difficult world of faith. So that, for example, there was a local police superintendent who was a Muslim himself, who had two junior officers who were refusing to go into the East London mosque because they said it was against their Christian faith to go into the building itself, because that would be idolatry on their part. And he didn't know whether this was an acceptable view within Christianity, or whether they were just trying to pull the wool over his eyes to get another job. And so he came to us to say, is this acceptable? And I could ask my colleagues, and found that although it certainly wasn't a view that I would take, that some of my Church of England colleagues here did feel that that was an acceptable line within a Christian response to Islam. So as much as I didn't particularly like that, I could go back and say that, yeah, this is a view within the Church of England even. So he ought to tolerate them. So with things like that, increasingly, we've been able to be a conduit. And the Interfaith Forum in Tower Hamlets does less projects itself than connects people to one another to be able to enable relationships to grow and for things to happen.
Thank you so much. And can you talk about some of the challenges that you've had to navigate in that interfaith work that maybe particularly you didn't expect to have to encounter?
The first challenge was the lack of seriousness with which those relationships were built, by which I mean that it was very patchy, so that at times we were being taken as partners by secular colleagues. And at other times, we were either being overlooked completely, or we were treated as a useful means to their end, in which we were simply their clients. So, for example, they were planning a new community plan and wanting to get as widespread views about the future of Tower Hamlets as they could. And they came to the faith communities, not because they wanted views of faith, but that they saw us a bit like a bus stop, that in my church there would be an interesting group of people of different ages and different ethnicities that they could ask questions to. They weren't interested in us as a faith, and they weren't interested in people's responses out of their faith. They were simply asking, what do you think about rubbish on the streets and things, and expecting an answer because they were a certain age or ethnicity. And it took a decade, I think, before the next time that happened, that we were being consulted as people of faith. What is it that your faith can contribute to life in Tower Hamlets? So it was a very slow process of building that up, and I think we're still working at being treated properly as a partner, and that is most clearly the case within health. I think one of the good things that has come out of the difficult years of the pandemic is that increasingly our health colleagues have seen the spiritual dimensions that we can engage with that complement the work that they are doing. And that's enabled us to begin to move forwards in a way that was not possible before the pandemic. And there is real talk about partnership between the local NHS Health Trust and faith communities in the borough in responding to people's health inequalities in particular.
It's fascinating. Thank you. Yeah, well, I suppose sort of leading on to that, because I mentioned at the beginning, of course, you are a rector of a parish church in London. I suppose what would be interesting for us to know is how you feel that your work with the Interfaith Forum, or interfaith work in general, is informed by your faith. But also it would be interesting to know if you feel that you sort of any lessons that you learned whilst as an SEM member that you feel that you've sort of have guided you through your ministry and into your interfaith work as well.
Yeah, as I've already intimated, I had no great intention of doing interfaith work, and I've never had any particular interest in interfaith work for itself. I am here as an Anglican parish priest, and as we all do, I was licensed to serve everyone who lives in this parish. I'm not here just for the congregation. I'm not here just for the Christians in the parish. I'm here to serve everybody. And I do that service by putting on services every day for those who are committed Christians and come to church. I put those services on in order that worship happens within the community, so that there is a Christian presence praying for everyone who lives here every day, irrespective of their faith or what they're doing. But then service to the community also by identifying what the issues are locally and responding to them. It's not an added extra. It's not a means of gathering more of a Christian community in my church, though it's always nice if that happens. But that's not the point. The point is the same ministry as I have behind the altar is when I'm out on the streets defending Tower Hamlets against the idiots of the English Defence League. That's the other side of being behind the altar. So that's always been really crucial to me, and that was the basis on which I was prepared to enter a full-time ministry in the first place. That I was somewhat challenged by selling my soul to the establishment, but I had seen that throughout history, in spite of its establishment status, the church had spoken out, had stood apart at difficult times in this nation's history, and that indeed at the time that I was thinking about ordination, Faith in the City came out, and the Church of England appeared to be the major opposition to Mrs. Thatcher, much more than the Labour Party at that time, and that gave me then the confidence to join and to identify as part of this establishment church.
Wow, thank you so much. I think what you said is really powerful about the call and the responsibility of parish priests to serve the whole community, not just their congregation. I think that could be we could just put that out there as a reminder, send that to a flyer to all parish priests. Now, obviously, the majority of people that are members of SCM or connected to the SCM network aren't Church of England parish priests, but I think you've brought up a question or reminder that interfaith engagement isn't something that we should, it's not a side thing. It's something that it should be part of all of our daily lives. It includes all kind of interactions. It's not something we do on a Friday night or something like that. So the next and kind of final main question is, what advice would you give to young people that are interested in getting involved in interfaith work, and what are the kind of first steps that they should take to be able to do that?
I mean, I think the crucial thing is not about interfaith. It's about identifying what the issues are locally. What are the challenges for your local community? In many cases, that in urban situations in particular, that is likely to involve an interfaith dimension, not least because certainly in places like Tower Hamlets, those who are most deprived are more likely to be an ethnic minority here, or are likely to be part of a minority faith within this country. So ensuring that is part of the response to the challenges locally, I think that's really important. What I've never been interested in is interfaith for its own sake. I'm not interested in trying to bring the faiths together and find some sort of means of worship that can encompass all of us. The solidarity that happens is respecting one another's way of worship, of theological understanding, even when there are clear differences between us, so that I might be united in an Abrahamic faith with my Muslim brothers and sisters, but we recognize that we're both exclusive, and we both say that we're the only way to God, and that should not divide us, and we shouldn't take any time trying to work through that and make compromises so that somehow we have a justification for that situation. That's part of our different makeup, and that doesn't prevent us standing together in complete solidarity against the challenges that we face. So it is trying, for me, it's about trying to get that balance right. The liberation theologian Alberto Fierro said that what was important was standing together on the barricades, and maybe when we finish for the day and go to the pub, that's the time that we might want to talk about our religious differences. And he was really talking about atheism and Christianity, but I think that works maybe not in the pub with my Muslim colleagues, but certainly it should be what we do when we're having a cup of tea after we've finished the work that we've got to do, not in place of that work.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you so much, Alan. It's been so fascinating to talk to you. And I feel, I'm sure Sophie feels the same, and I'm sure our listeners will feel the same, that you've given us a lot to think about. And yes, I feel really inspired. So thank you for joining us today.
Great pleasure.
Thank you very much.